Have you ever had the wind knocked out of you professionally? Maybe it was a job you didn't get, a promotion that went to someone else, a project you poured your heart into, derailed, dismissed, or outright rejected. Most of us have a story like that, not because we're weak, but because we're human and because leadership isn't about a smooth ride. It's about how we respond when things go off course. This training is about that moment, the moment after the no, after the door closes, after the big stumble, the public failure, the silent disappointment. We're talking about resilience, not as a buzzword, but as a leadership muscle. Resilience isn't about pretending everything's fine. It's about feeling the sting and rising anyway. It's about getting back up with wisdom, with grit, and with a deeper sense of self. In this session, we'll explore why resilience is one of the most critical leadership traits in today's world, what it actually looks like to bounce back, and not just bounce back, but bounce forward, and how women across industries are rewriting their leadership narratives after major setbacks. You'll hear real world stories of women who've lost jobs, faced bias, been overlooked, underestimated, and used those moments as fuel. You'll also be invited to reflect on your own journey. What have you overcome? And what did it teach you about your strength? So take a deep breath. This isn't about being unbreakable, it's about being rebuildable. And maybe, just maybe, coming back stronger than before. This is Leading with Resilience, Overcoming Setbacks. Let's get started. By the end of this training, you'll be able to define resilience as a core leadership competency and explain its significance in navigating workplace adversity. Identify common workplace setbacks, from rejection and failure to bias and burnout, and understand their emotional and professional impact. We'll also recognize the emotional cycle of setbacks, including initial reactions and the stages of recovery, reflection, and reframing. We'll apply practical strategies to build resilience and bounce back stronger after professional obstacles or disappointments. We're going to draw inspiration from real world stories of women leaders who turn their career challenges into turning points for growth, reinvention, or even redirection. We're also going to reflect on your own setbacks, identifying key lessons and internal strengths that you've gained from those experiences. And finally, we'll build a personal resilience toolkit, including mindset shifts, support systems, and sustainable coping strategies for long-term leadership success. So let's start by having you think back to a time in your career when something didn't go the way you hoped. Maybe you were passed over for a role you worked really hard for. Maybe you made a mistake that felt impossible to recover from. Maybe you were let go or stayed in a role for far too long because fear kept you planted. So take a moment and sit with that memory. What happened? How did you feel immediately and in the weeks that followed? What did that experience teach you about yourself? And what did it not teach you because you were too busy blaming yourself or trying to move on too quickly? We often bury these moments because they feel heavy. But this training invites you to bring one to the surface, not to relive the pain, but to reclaim the power in that lesson. Because your past setback isn't a weakness, it's a well of wisdom. And today we're going to draw from it. So take a moment and think of this time. Jot down a few notes, and here we go. So, what is resilience really? Let's debunk the myths and get real about it. Let's start with the truth. Resilience isn't about powering through. It's not about being tough, invulnerable, or always optimistic. The truth is, resilience is the capacity to adapt, to bend without breaking, to pause and recalibrate, to stumble and still choose to move forward. But there are a few persistent myths that we need to name and break down. Myth number 1: resilient people don't feel pain. But the reality is, resilient leaders absolutely feel pain. They feel grief and disappointment and anger. They don't just let those feelings define their future. They process emotions instead of bypassing them. And that processing is what makes recovery possible. Myth number 2: resilience means bouncing back quickly. But the truth is, the timeline is different for everyone. Real resilience doesn't rush the process. It's about learning from the fall, not pretending it didn't happen. Myth number 3: you're either resilient or you're not. Look, resilience is a skill, not a personality trait. It can be learned, practiced, and strengthened over time, especially in community. And this is because resilience in leadership isn't about perfection. It's about staying grounded in the face of rejection. It's about hearing no and choosing to keep showing up anyway. It's about reimagining success when the original plan falls apart. Research from the Center for Creative Leadership shows that leaders who demonstrate resilience are more likely to build high trust teams, handle ambiguity, and lead through change with greater effectiveness. And for women leaders who often face additional layers of scrutiny, system bias, or the prove it again trap, resilience becomes even more vital. So I'd like you to think about how you've defined resilience in your own leadership journey. Have you held yourself to unrealistic standards? Have you mistaken survival for resilience? What would it look like to redefine resilience as recovery, reinvention, or rising slowly? When we think of the word resilience, often what comes to mind is what happened first, the setback. And so let's explore the setback spectrum because there are some common career challenges that women face. And setbacks don't always come with flashing warning lights. Sometimes they're loud, like a layoff, maybe a missed promotion, or a failed project. But often they're quiet, they're subtle, and lingering. Let's name a few of the most common setbacks that women leaders experience, not because we want to dwell on them, but because we can't grow from what we won't name. And we'll start with being passed over or undervalued. You delivered results, you led the initiative, but the recognition or the promotion went to someone else. Often, it's not due to a lack of skill, but a lack of visibility, sponsorship, or bias in how leadership is defined. And then there's the prove it again phenomena. Research shows that women, particularly women of color, are more likely to have to reprove their competence again and again, even after repeated successes. It's exhausting, and over time, it chips away at confidence and engagement. Many women face career breaks and reentry challenges. Whether due to caregiving, health, or other life priorities, many women take these intentional career breaks. And then coming back, well, that's often met with skepticism. Questions such as, are you still current? Do you still have the edge? The answer is yes, but the perception doesn't always match. And then as women, we're more likely to face microaggressions, bias, and burnout. Sometimes the setback isn't a single event. It's the cumulative effect of being questioned, interrupted, excluded, or having your ideas echoed by someone else and then applauded. The impact adds up, and it leads many women to withdraw, shrink their ambitions, or opt out altogether. And I have to include setbacks by success because this one's sneaky. You finally get the promotion, and then you face resistance. You face undermining. Maybe it's just a lack of support in your new role. Sometimes the higher you rise, the harder the pushback. Which of these setbacks have you experienced or witnessed? And how did you respond at the time? What internal messages did you absorb? Like, I'm not good enough. I should have known better. This is just the way it is. And how have those moments shaped your leadership story? It's that story that is so important. It's what you're telling yourself about the experience, which sets us up for the future. So when we're looking at resilience in action, let's take some real world women who rose after the fall, because resilience isn't theoretical, it's lived. And some of the most powerful lessons in leadership come from the stories of women who faced professional setbacks, and they use those moments as a catalyst, not as a conclusion. So let's look at a few examples from the real world of leadership and organizational life. So our first case study is Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors. And before becoming the first female CEO of a major global automaker, Mary Barra weathered intense scrutiny and criticism when GM faced this massive safety crisis tied to ignition switch failures that resulted in fatalities. The media spotlight was brutal. The pressure to distance herself from the company's past was strong. Instead, Mary leaned in. She took public accountability, overhauled GM's safety culture, and focused on transparency over damage control. Under her leadership, GM reemerged stronger, more trusted, and more innovative. So, what we can learn from this is that resilience isn't just about personal recovery, it's about reshaping systems from within. Our second case study is Rosalind Brewer. She's the former CEO of Walgreens Boots Alliance. Now, Rosalind Brewer, one of the only two Black women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies in 2021, was praised for her transformational leadership at Starbucks and later Walgreens. But early in her career, she was told by a boss that she would never move past a certain level because she was a Black woman. She didn't just prove him wrong, she changed the conversation. Rosalind has since used her platform to address representation, lead with integrity, and build inclusive leadership pipelines. What we learn from her is that setbacks rooted in bias can spark purpose-driven leadership when met with courage and vision. And our third and final case study is Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo. Now, when Indra took the reins at PepsiCo, she faced resistance to her push for healthier product lines. She wanted sustainable practices as well, and she had so much pushback on this. The critics said she was straying from Pepsi's core, but she held her ground. Years later, her performance with purpose strategy was hailed as visionary, and she's now widely credited with modernizing and future proofing the brand. So, what we learn from her is that being ahead of your time often means being misunderstood in the moment. Resilience means staying true to the long game. And each of these women faced resistance, criticism, or rejection, but they didn't pivot away from the challenge, they pivoted through it. Which of these stories resonates most with you? Have you ever been told you weren't ready or felt pressure to abandon your vision to play it safe? What would it mean to trust your leadership even when others don't see the full picture yet? I'd like to shift for a moment to take a look at the anatomy of a resilient leader. So here are 5 practices that build bounce back strength. Resilient leaders aren't born, they're built, often through challenge, reflection, and choice. When we study women who've weathered major setbacks and come back stronger, 5 consistent practices emerge. These aren't personality traits, they're habits. They're trainable, intentional, and deeply human. So let's break them down. The first is emotional honesty. Resilient leaders don't pretend everything's fine when it's not. They name their emotions, sit with discomfort, and resist the urge to bypass the hard parts. This doesn't mean spiraling, it means acknowledging. Things like, this was disappointing, or this hurts, or this feels unfair. It's okay to sit in those feelings because only through honesty can the healing begin. So try this. Use check in language with yourself. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Ask, what am I feeling? And what do I need to do right now? Second is reframing the narrative. Remember, it's that story we're telling ourselves. A setback's an event. A story is what we build around it. Resilient leaders pause and ask, what else could be true? What might this make possible? What would I tell a friend if she were going through this? This doesn't erase the pain, but it helps you re anchor your power. Third, connection, not isolation. Setbacks often trigger shame, and shame thrives in silence. Resilient leaders reach out. They process with trusted peers, mentors, coaches, or communities. They understand that vulnerability shared in safe spaces creates clarity and strength. Resilience isn't a solo performance, it's a supported process. Resilient leaders also take action in micro steps. When everything feels overwhelming, resilient leaders take one small step. Maybe it's updating a resume or sending that email, walking into the meeting with your shoulders back, even if your heart is still healing. Momentum builds confidence, and action, even imperfect action, restores agency. And finally, there's meaning making. This is where true leadership transformation happens because resilient leaders don't just recover, they grow. They ask, what is this setback here to teach me? How can I use this experience to lead others more effectively? What part of my leadership is becoming stronger through this? So, which of these 5 practices comes naturally to you? Which one feels like a growth edge? You don't need to master all 5 overnight. Start with one, strengthen it, then layer into the next. Resilience isn't built in leaps, it's built in layers. And now it's time to discuss how we can turn our setbacks into strategy. We'll be doing this by building your resilience toolkit because setbacks will come. That's not the question. The question is, how will you respond? Not react, respond. Your resilience toolkit is your personal set of strategies to navigate disruption, disappointment, or derailment, and to come back stronger, clearer, and more grounded. So here's a simple structure that you can use again and again. The Resilience Toolkit has 6 essential components. The first is reset your nervous system. Now, this may seem very basic, but often we overthink things. So, setbacks activate our fight, flight, and freeze response. Before strategy, you need safety. So, here's your toolkit tip. Step away from the screen. Take 5 deep belly breaths. Go for a walk. Put your hand on your heart. Reconnect to your body. Resilient leadership starts with regulation, not reactivity. We have to slow down. So, this reset to our nervous system is the first step. Second, name the story you're telling yourself. What narrative is playing in your mind? Is it helpful or harmful? Write it down. The story I'm telling myself is, then challenge it. Ask yourself, what else could be true? This simple mindset shift unlocks clarity and breaks the shame spiral. Third, identify your resilience anchors. Who or what helps you stay grounded? When that storm hits, who is that person or what happens that helps you ground yourself? Make a list of 3 to 5 different anchors, people, practices, principles. Maybe it's a mentor. Maybe it's journaling your values. Maybe it's your faith, a playlist you listen to that gives you hope, a quote, a place you walk. Return to your anchors often. These are going to help build that resilience. I know I have my favorite songs in the playlist, and these are my go tos to drive me and build that resilience. Fourth, you're going to extract the lesson because every setback carries a seed of insight. You're going to ask yourself, what did I learn about myself? What strength did I discover that I didn't know I had? What boundaries or values were clarified through this? Growth begins with reflection. And finally, plan the next micro move. Resilience doesn't demand a giant comeback. It invites a small reentry. Choose one forward step. Reconnect with a mentor. Apply for one role. Pitch your idea again. Write the first paragraph of your story. Action renews hope. My favorite, I call this my bonus, celebrate your resilience because too often we skip this. But honoring your bounce back matters. Keep a resilience wins list. This is a private record of the times you kept going, even when it was hard. You're going to need it for the next time your inner critic speaks up. So, which tools already exist in your life, but you're not using consistently? Which new ones are you ready to try? You can't avoid all setbacks, but with the right tools, you'll never be without support, strength, or strategy. So, I'd like to share a story of someone who illustrates turning setbacks into strength. Because resilience isn't about clawing your way back from rock bottom. Sometimes it's about navigating the subtle internal battles, things like imposter syndrome, self doubt, the weight of expectation, while still showing up, leading forward, and lifting others as you go. That's the kind of resilience that Kelley Schmidt embodies. As the director of recreational wellness programs at the University of Arkansas, Kelley leads with intention, empathy, and a strong sense of purpose. But like so many women in leadership, her journey hasn't been without challenge. Kelley describes wrestling with imposter syndrome throughout her career, especially as she rose into roles where few women had stood before her. Even with a strong track record and visible success, those quiet inner voices still crept in. Do I belong here? Am I doing enough? What if they find out I'm not perfect? But instead of shrinking or pretending, Kelley chose something brave. She named it. She owned her experience, and she created space for others to do the same. She began leading with vulnerability, not as weakness, but as strength. She modeled transparency, admitted when she didn't have all the answers, and invited collaboration over control. And something shifted there, not just in her own confidence, but in the culture she was shaping. Kelley now uses her story to empower other women, reminding them that doubt doesn't disqualify you from leadership. In fact, it's often a sign you care deeply and are growing. Her resilience isn't loud or performative. It's steady, intentional, and rooted in service and self-awareness. Have you ever felt like Kelley, capable and accomplished, yet still unsure you belonged? What would it look like to lead through that uncertainty with openness instead of hiding it? So let me ask you, what kind of culture could you help create by naming what others are afraid to say? And this is exactly what Rob Johnson does because he's redefining strength through vulnerability. Rob Johnson is a city manager, city of San Jacinto, California. He's a public leader, a decision maker. But ask him what leadership really requires, and he won't talk about authority or accolades. He'll talk about resilience. And more importantly, he'll talk about doubt. Rob openly shares that he's experienced imposter syndrome. Yes, even at the highest levels of leadership. He's candid about the moments he's questioned himself, the pressure to always have the answer, the quiet weight of being responsible for the entire city's direction. But instead of hiding those moments, he's chosen to name them. And in doing so, Rob models something powerful, that strength and vulnerability are not opposites, they're partners. He shows up as a leader who doesn't pretend to be bulletproof. He encourages open conversations about mental health, self doubt, and emotional realities of leadership for all, for women, for men, for underrepresented voices who are often told to toughen up or play the game. And as a male ally, Rob uses his platform to challenge outdated definitions of resilience. He believes real leadership is about honesty, empathy, and courage, especially when things go wrong. In meetings, mentoring conversations, and public forums, Rob leans into presence over posturing, and his teams follow suit, not because they fear him, but because they trust him. Rob doesn't just say the right things, he backs them with behavior. He lifts others up in rooms they're not in. He actively mentors emerging leaders, regardless of gender. He creates cultures where failure is framed as feedback, not as a character flaw. That's resilience. That's allyship. And that's leadership worth modeling. What would it look like for more male leaders to talk about imposter syndrome and normalize it? What support systems have helped you build resilience in the workplace? And who in your life is modeling allyship by showing up with both strength and softness? So now that we've looked at both a male and a female leader, let's take a global perspective on resilience. Let's look at what other cultures teach us about bouncing back. Resilience is universal, but how it's expressed, supported, and understood can vary widely across cultures. In some cultures, resilience is quiet and communal. In others, it's bold and individualistic. Some honor emotional expression, others prize endurance and stoicism. So let's take a look at how resilience shows up around the world and what we can learn from those perspectives. In Japan, broken pottery is often repaired with lacquer mixed with gold dust. The cracks aren't hidden, they're highlighted. The flaw becomes part of the story. This philosophy, known as kintsugi, reflects a deep cultural belief that healing can be beautiful and that scars are not something to be ashamed of. So, what we can learn from the Japanese culture is don't hide your history, honor it. Your setbacks are a part of your leadership identity. In Maori culture, resilience is deeply tied to the way now, extended family, and community. Well being is not just individual, it's collective. Strength comes from knowing you're part of something larger and leaning in on that connection during hard times. So, what we learn from the New Zealand culture is that resilience doesn't have to be solitary. Community care is a valid, powerful source of recovery. In Mexican culture, many women draw resilience from a blend of faith, family, and fierce adaptability. Challenges are often met with humor, practicality, and an instinct to pivot, making do with what's available while keeping traditions alive. So, what we can learn from the Mexican culture is that you can be both grounded in values and flexible in strategy. Resilience is not rigidity, it's creative endurance. And finally, in Nigerian culture, resilience is often passed down through storytelling, proverbs, or oral tradition. Elders share hard earned wisdom that becomes a compass during times of struggle. One Igbo proverb says, "When the root of a tree begins to decay, it spreads death to the branches," meaning we must tend to our foundation to remain strong. So build your resilience, not just from reaction, but from reflection and ancestral wisdom. Which cultural perspective resonates most with you? How does your background or heritage shape how you respond to setbacks? And what would it look like to borrow from another culture's approach when your current strategy isn't serving you? Look, setbacks are not the end of your story. They're the part where the real story begins. You've now explored what resilience really means, from emotional honesty and micro moves to the power of cultural wisdom, community care, and real world leadership in action. Let's ground that in a few key takeaways. To start, resilience isn't about toughness, it's about recovery. You don't have to be unshakable, you just have to be willing to rebuild. Second, setbacks are shape leaders. It's not the absence of failure that defines success, it's the ability to learn, adapt, and return. Third, your experience holds wisdom. Even if it came wrapped in disappointment or pain, there's power in the lessons you've lived through. And finally, resilience grows in layers through support, reflection, and courage, not isolation or perfectionism. So now it's time to take everything we've learned in this training and make it meaningful and custom tailored for you by putting your resilience into practice. So resilience isn't built in the background, it's built in motion through small, intentional choices that strengthen our ability to respond, recover, and rise. Here's how you can start putting what you've learned into action today and long term. So, we're going to start with 3 different actions that you can take this week. The first is to identify your resilience reset strategy. Think of one grounding practice that you can use when setback hits. This could be breath work, a brisk walk, a mantra, that power ballad, or calling someone who helps you recenter. Write it down, keep it accessible. The second is to reach out, don't retreat. Is there a peer, a mentor, or a trusted colleague that you've been meaning to reconnect with? Send them a message. Start the conversation. Share what you're navigating. Resilience is nurtured in relationship, not in isolation. And then third, revisit a past setback, but this time through a new lens. Choose one career challenge that you've experienced. Now, journal it, voice note it. I need the lessons learned, what those lessons are that this experience offered. Then ask yourself, what part of my leadership is stronger because of this? How am I stronger because of this? Turning your past into insight transforms it from pain into power. And to take this one step further, let's look at your long-term strategy by building your personal resilience plan. You can create your own resilience roadmap by using these guiding questions. First, what are my common emotional triggers during setbacks? Second, what's my go-to unhealthy response? And what could I replace that with? Third, who are the people or communities that I can lean on? Fourth, what values will anchor me when things get really hard? And then five, how will I celebrate moments of recovery even if they feel small? This becomes your custom playbook, your leadership safety net. And as a bonus action, let's begin to normalize the conversation. In your next team meeting or one-on-one, model vulnerability. Say something like, here's a time I hit a wall and what I learned from it. Every time we make space for stories of struggle and strength, we make resilience less taboo and we make it more real. So I'd like you to think of a past career setback that once felt defining and ask yourself, what did I learn about myself through that experience? How did it shape the kind of leader I am today? If I could go back and speak to that version of me, what would I say? Maybe you'd say, you're not broken, you're becoming. Because you're not broken and you're always becoming. You've reflected, you've remembered all of those things that you've come through. And now you've reclaimed the strength that was always there. So let's close with a simple but powerful reflection. Think of a setback that once made you question your worth. Now ask yourself, what did it reveal about my courage, my creativity, or my capacity to lead? We don't become resilient in spite of our challenges. We become resilient through them. This is your invitation to rise. You're not alone in this journey. There are thousands, maybe millions of us, women and allies doing the work, reshaping leadership, and refusing to be silenced by setbacks. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss future trainings. And if you haven't joined the Women's Leadership Support Network on LinkedIn, please do. This is a space for connection, growth, and shared leadership wisdom. Finally, please share this training with a colleague, a friend, or a rising leader who might need this message right now. Let's keep growing. Let's keep rising, because together we rise.